I work night shifts at a hospital in Victorville. 12 hours on my feet, 3 nights a week, sometimes 4. By the time I clock out, the whole world feels like it's moving underwater. Tired doesn't even begin to cover it. That morning in late July 2022, the sun was already brutal by the time I finished. I grabbed a stale coffee from the vending machine, said goodbye to the few coworkers still staggering around, and hit the road for home. My place was about an hour away, tucked toward the outskirts of Barstow. The drive usually helped me decompress. Windows down, some music humming low, empty desert rolling by. There's a stretch of highway between the hospital and home where there's nothing for miles. No gas stations, no stores, no cell towers. Just sand, rocks, and that endless ripple of heat waves across the asphalt. About halfway through that stretch, my car's temperature gauge started creeping higher. I tapped the dashboard like that would help. The AC coughed out hot air and a warning light blinked on. I pulled onto the shoulder, engine knocking. I killed the ignition. The hood was already radiating heat in shimmering waves. At first, I wasn't too worried. I figured I'd let it cool off, maybe pour some water into the radiator once it settled. That's what Dad always said to do. I popped the hood and stepped out, immediately regretting it. The sun felt like it could peel the skin off my bones. I checked my phone. No service. Typical. I twisted the water bottle I had, but it was already half empty from my drive home and lukewarm at best. I leaned against the driver's door, squinting down the road. Not a car in sight in either direction. The heat made the empty highway look like it was underwater. Maybe 10 minutes passed, long enough for me to start second-guessing if I could walk somewhere, though I wasn't sure where somewhere even was. I was about to pop the trunk for my emergency kit when I heard the sound of an engine approaching. A beat-up white pickup truck rattled into view, kicking up dust. It slowed as it neared me, then pulled onto the shoulder behind my car. The driver hopped out. A man in maybe his mid-50s, ball cap, aviator sunglasses, work boots, and jeans stained with grease. He gave a small wave as he approached. "You all right, miss?" He called out, hand shading his eyes. Something in me relaxed. He didn't look threatening. Just some good old boy willing to help. Still, I stayed close to my car, one hand on the door handle. "Car overheated," I said, forcing a smile. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked, nodding toward my open hood. Sure." He popped the hood higher and leaned in, fiddling with something I couldn't see from where I stood. That's when I noticed it. From where I was standing, I could see into his truck through the open driver's side window. The interior was a mess. Fast food wrappers, crushed soda cans, old clothes. But what caught my eye were 2 license plates, different states, propped up on the passenger seat, like he'd just swapped them out when he needed to. My stomach twisted. I didn't hesitate. I slid back into my car, locking the doors behind me with a solid, satisfying click. The man straightened up and walked over, wiping his hands on a rag. "You can start her up now," he said, tapping the hood. I cracked the window just an inch. "I think I'm going to wait a bit," I said, trying to sound calm. "Let her cool down more." He smiled, but there was no friendliness in it now. It was a smile that knew something. "No problem," he said. "But you sure you don't need a lift? Town's a ways off." I shook my head. "I'll be fine, thank you." For a moment, he just stood there, watching me. Then, slowly, he tried the passenger door handle. Click. Tried the back door. Click. Moved back around to my side and tried the driver's side rear door. Click. I sat frozen, pretending to fumble with my phone like I was dialing someone. Still no service, but I put it to my ear anyway. He rapped his knuckles lightly on my window. "You know," he said, low enough that I barely heard it through the glass, "there's bad people out here. You gotta be careful." He gave one last smile, too wide, too flat, and walked slowly back to his truck. I started laying on my horn, non-stop. Long, desperate blasts cutting through the heavy air. At first, he didn't react, just leaned against his truck door like he was waiting for something. Then, blessedly, another vehicle appeared down the highway. A family-sized SUV towing a boat. As it grew closer, the man scowled, spat in the dirt, and jumped into his truck. He peeled away in the opposite direction, tires spraying gravel. The SUV slowed to check on me, and the driver, a man with 2 teenagers in the back seat, asked if I needed help. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes from sheer relief. They had a satellite phone and were able to call a tow truck for me. I stayed parked between their car and mine until it showed up. When I finally got home, safe and tired beyond words, I filed a police report. They asked for a description of the man and his truck. I mentioned the license plates in the cab. The officer exchanged a look with his partner. They told me that in the last few months, there had been a rash of attacks along isolated stretches like the one where I broke down. Same MO. A lone woman, broken down car, and a good Samaritan who wasn't interested in fixing anything. Sometimes they were never seen again. Sometimes only the car was found. They handled it like it was important. I gave them every detail I could remember: the make of the truck, the plates I saw, the man's face. But I don't know if they ever caught him. They didn't tell me. For weeks after that, I jumped every time a car slowed down near me. I bought a new car. I don't drive that stretch anymore unless I absolutely have to. And even then, my trunk is stocked with emergency supplies. My phone is preloaded with offline maps. I carry a small crowbar under my seat. I also trust my instincts now, because I realized that morning, under that blistering sun, that the scariest thing wasn't my broken car. It wasn't being stranded with no phone signal. It wasn't even being alone in the middle of nowhere. The scariest thing was realizing that he hadn't stopped to help me. He had stopped to make sure no one would ever find me. I don't usually take solo trips. Between my shifts at the vet clinic and all the family stuff back home, free weekends were rare. And honestly, when I did get time off, I usually just slept. But that spring, I was starting to feel claustrophobic in my own life. Work, traffic, noise. I needed a reset. Something quiet, somewhere open where I could actually breathe. A friend recommended a little cabin out in rural Wyoming. One road in, one road out, about 10 minutes off the main highway. No neighbors for miles. A tiny thing with just a kitchen, a bed, and a view of endless prairie grass and wide blue skies. Exactly what I needed. I packed light, just some groceries, a stack of books, my hiking boots, and headed out early Friday morning. The drive was beautiful at first. Huge clouds like towers of cotton, pale yellow fields swaying in the breeze. You don't realize how loud the city is until you're out there, with nothing but wind and your own thoughts. The road narrowed the further I got, asphalt crumbling into gravel, then just packed dirt lined with old fence posts and the occasional mailbox. About 20 minutes from the cabin, I spotted it, a van, maybe 30 feet off the side of the road. It was old, rust eaten around the wheel wells and bumper, sitting at a strange angle, like it had been dropped there. All the windows were so dirty I couldn't see inside. One of the back doors was hanging slightly open. There was no one around. No house. no barn, no tracks leading away from it. I slowed a little, instincts kicking up that quiet background alarm that you can't fully explain. But what was I supposed to do? It's not like I could call anyone. There hadn't been a single bar of service for the last half hour. I figured it had broken down and been abandoned. Maybe someone would come back for it later. Still, I pressed the gas a little harder after I passed. When I reached the cabin, I checked everything the way I always do when I stay somewhere new. Doors locked? Windows latched? Cell signal? No, of course not. Emergency flashlight by the bed? Check. I cracked a beer, made a sandwich, and sat on the tiny porch, soaking up the quiet. For the first time in weeks, I felt my shoulders unclench. That night, the wind picked up hard. Old beams creaked. The little cabin seemed to exhale around me. I built a small fire in the stove, curled up with a book, and started to doze. Around midnight, something woke me. A sharp sound, way too intentional to be just the house settling. Knocking. I sat up straight, the fire throwing weird, jumpy shadows against the walls. For a second, I thought maybe I had imagined it. But then it came again. 3 slow knocks at the front door. I held my breath and listened as hard as I could. Nothing after that. No footsteps, no voices, just the shriek of the wind outside. I tiptoed to the window, careful not to let the firelight behind me give away my shadow. I pressed my face to the glass, peeking through a gap in the curtain. And there it was. The van. It was parked at the base of the driveway now. Headlights off, engine silent, just sitting there in the dark. I couldn't see the driver's seat clearly from my angle, but the shape of the van was unmistakable. Same rust-eaten frame, same slightly ajar back door. It hadn't been broken down. It had been waiting. I dropped the curtain and backed away from the window, heart hammering. Okay, stay calm, I told myself. Doors are locked. Windows are bolted. I'm inside. They're outside. I grabbed my keys and my flashlight and made a plan in the space of 3 shaky breaths. The cabin had a side door that led out into the woods. If I could slip out unseen, I could circle around through the trees, get to my car, and drive out. No way was I opening the front door. No way was I staying inside like a sitting duck either. I killed the fire, snuffing the light as much as I could, and crept to the side door. Hand on the knob, I listened. The knocking came again, but slower this time. Not loud. Testing. I slipped out, shutting the door behind me with agonizing slowness. The cold hit me like a slap. I crouched low and ran, straight into the black wall of trees. Branches whipped against my arms and face. I didn't dare use the flashlight until I was deep enough in that the cabin lights, if there were any, couldn't catch me. When I finally clicked it on, I used my jacket to shield the beam. The forest thinned closer to the dirt road. My car sat parked in the little gravel pull-off where I'd left it. 100 feet, maybe less, wide open. I sprinted, unlocking the doors with a shaky hand. Once inside, I jammed the key into the ignition and cranked it over, praying it wouldn't stall. The engine kicked on, loud and sudden. As I threw it into reverse, my headlights swung across the cabin and briefly illuminated a figure standing halfway down the driveway, facing the cabin. Not moving, not chasing, just standing there. I gunned it onto the dirt road and tore off into the dark. I didn't stop driving until I hit a diner on the outskirts of the nearest town. One with bright fluorescent lights and security cameras and other people. I parked right by the door, stumbling inside, and called the sheriff from the payphone. When they went to check the property the next morning, The van was gone, but they found pry marks on the front door, fresh scuffs near the latch where someone had tried to force it. They told me it wasn't the first time someone had tried something like that in the area. Sometimes thieves scouted isolated rentals looking for easy break-ins. Sometimes it was worse than that. I asked if they'd found the man. The deputy just shook his head. "Hard to find someone who doesn't want to be found out here," he said. It still keeps me up some nights, thinking about that knocking. How polite it sounded at first. How patient he must have been at just standing there in the dark, waiting for me to make a mistake. He didn't need to break in. He just needed me to open the door first. I'd always dreamed of doing a solo camping trip. Just me, the trees, and whatever thoughts I could finally untangle without the noise of other people. After a rough breakup and a stressful year of teaching yoga classes nonstop, it felt like exactly what I needed. Something to reset my soul. Something real. Olympic National Park seemed perfect. Untouched forest for miles, towering trees so thick they swallowed sound, trails that barely saw more than a few hikers a day. It felt like the closest I could get to being completely alone without actually dropping off the face of the earth. I picked a remote back country site, just a clearing near a shallow stream. The hike-in took most of the day. By the time I set up my tent, the sun was sinking low, filtering through the branches like gold dust. That first evening was beautiful. I made a tiny fire, read a few chapters of the novel I'd been meaning to finish, stretched out under the fading light and listened to the wind comb through the treetops. For the first time in months, I wasn't anyone's teacher, friend, sister, or daughter. I was just there, existing. I slept like a rock that night, until I stepped out of my tent the next morning. There, placed carefully right outside the zipper, was a bundle. Looked like nothing at first. I thought it was just some debris blown together by the wind. But it was too neat. A tiny cluster of twigs tied together with a strip of what looked like plant fiber, feathers tucked into the knot, and a few long, coarse strands of what looked like human hair woven through. I crouched down, inspecting it. Maybe it was some local native tradition I didn't know about? Or kids from a nearby campsite playing a prank? It didn't feel threatening, just odd. I left it there, brushed my teeth, made some coffee, and set off for a day hike deeper into the park. I didn't see another soul the entire time. By the time I got back, the bundle was gone. I told myself an animal had dragged it off. It was fine. Everything was fine. That night, it rained. The sound of it drumming against the tent was oddly soothing. I dozed off quickly, cocooned in my sleeping bag, feeling safer than I probably should have. Sometime deep into the night, I woke up to a strange feeling. Not a sound, not a sight, just that prickle you get when you're being watched. I stayed frozen for a while, straining to hear anything over the rain. Eventually, I drifted back to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, the tent smelled faintly of wet earth and something else. Something musky and wrong. I unzipped the door and looked outside. Nothing. But when I turned around to gather my things, my stomach dropped. Another bundle. This one was inside the tent, laid neatly right next to my sleeping bag. Same construction, twigs, feathers, hair. But closer now. So much closer. I hadn't heard anyone unzip the tent. I hadn't seen anyone. How could someone have gotten in without waking me? I threw my stuff together faster than I ever had. Heart racing and fingers fumbling over buckles and straps. My plan was simple. Hike out as fast as I could. Get back to the car. Get the hell out of the woods. I didn't even bother eating breakfast. I just shoved protein bars into my pocket and started moving. The rain had slowed to a mist, but the forest was different now. Every little noise had me on high alert. The trees didn't feel like just trees anymore. They felt like they were watching, like they were hiding things just beyond my sight. Halfway back to the trailhead, I noticed something move in the woods to my left. A flash of something pale behind a tree. I froze, waited, nothing. I picked up the pace, heart pounding. Then another flash. This time ahead of me, maybe 30 yards off the trail. Someone was following me, keeping pace, hiding. I wanted to run, but some part of me knew better. Running would just make noise, make me easier to track. I kept moving steadily, clutching the pepper spray on my keychain so hard my fingers cramped. At one point, I heard a voice. Low, almost too soft to catch over the wind. A whistle. 3 short notes. I didn't look, didn't acknowledge, just kept walking. It took everything I had not to break into a sprint when I finally saw the parking lot through the trees. When I burst out into the clearing where my car was parked, I expected to see someone standing by it, waiting, but there was no one. Just my car, sitting there like a lifeline. I climbed in, locked the doors immediately, and sat there for a minute, catching my breath. The woods stared back at me through the windshield. Nothing moved. I drove straight to the ranger station at the edge of the park. The woman behind the desk listened carefully as I told her everything. The bundles, the movement in the trees, the whistle. When I mentioned the bundles, her face changed. She asked if she could see them, but I told her I'd left them behind. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. Sometimes, she said quietly, you get isolated individuals out here. People who live off-grid. Some groups too. They use things like that, bundles, to mark people, like tagging. Tagging, I repeated. She nodded, marking you as theirs. I didn't stay another night. I drove straight into a major city, booked a motel with bright lights and too much noise, and double-locked the door behind me. I never went solo camping again, because they weren't trying to scare me. They were claiming me. I've been leading wilderness treks for over 20 years. Seen it all. Bears bluff charging, sudden snow squalls in June, tourists panicking over harmless raccoons. You learn fast in the backcountry. 99% of what scares people is either imagination or misinterpretation. The wild is wild, but it's not out to get you. That's why I still can't explain what happened out there. Why it still sticks with me. It was a solo trip in late October 2021. Northern Idaho, not far from the Selway Bitterroot Wilderness. I knew the route cold. I wasn't taking risks. It was supposed to be a straightforward 5-day loop, checking remote trail conditions for the Forest Service before winter shut everything down. I carried a Garmin satellite beacon, standard gear, plenty of food. I double-checked my weather app before setting out. Cold, wet, some thunderstorm risk, but manageable. A normal trek. The first 2 days were peaceful. Quiet trails, golden tamaracks dropping needles like soft rain. No cell service, but that was the point. Just me, the trail, and the endless woods. The third day is when I noticed it. It was late afternoon, the air sharp and wet from an earlier drizzle. I was about 3 miles from my intended camp for the night, moving along a narrow ridge trail. To my left, the ground sloped steeply down into thick pine and fir. To my right, a broad valley opened up, rivers cutting silver ribbons through dark green. And up on the next ridge over, a shape. At first look, it seemed like a normal dead tree. Lightning flashed behind it, and for a split second it was framed in perfect silhouette. A human figure, standing stock still, facing me. Now, you see hikers sometimes way off trails, hunters, mostly, or survivalists doing off-grid stuff. No big deal. But this figure wasn't moving, wasn't carrying visible gear, just standing there, arms by its sides. I paused, squinting into the fading light. Another flash. Still there. No shift, no natural sway like you'd expect from a human trying to balance against the wind. Maybe it was just a weathered stump, my mind filling in the blanks. I kept hiking. Every few steps I looked back. Sometimes I'd lose sight of it behind trees, sometimes I wouldn't see it at all. But whenever the lightning flashed, there it was, still standing, still facing me. I picked up my pace. When I finally made camp near a small clearing, I told myself it was just my nerves. Fatigue, maybe a trick of the storm light. I'd been out alone too long already. The mind plays tricks when all you have for company is your own breath and the snap of wet branches. Still, I didn't sleep much that night. Every gust of wind against the tent sounded like footsteps. Every creak of the pines felt like someone moving just out of view. I was packed and moving by first light. About 5 miles from the trailhead, near a spot where the trees thin out and you get long sight lines, I made a mistake. I looked back. There, across the small valley, maybe 200 yards out, was the same figure, still unmoving, still watching. It was broad daylight now. No storm, no tricks of the eye. I couldn't make out a face, just the outline. Heavy coat, stocky build, no visible backpack, no weapon that I could see, but no gear either. No normal hiker would be out here without a pack. No one sane, anyway. I didn't stop walking, just turned my head and kept moving, a little faster now. My heart was going crazy, but I kept it together. Panic gets you hurt out here. I couldn't afford a twisted ankle or a wrong turn. But every time the trail switchbacked or rose high enough for a look behind me, there he was. Same distance, same stillness. Like he was waiting for something. Hours passed. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a scarecrow someone put up for a joke. Maybe I'd cross paths with a backcountry ranger later who'd laugh and say, "Oh yeah, that's Old Man Marker. Been there for years." But deep down, I didn't believe that. Around noon, as I made a sharp turn to cross a ridge, I caught sight of the trail behind me again. And for the first time, he was closer. Maybe 100 yards now. No movement, no visible chase, just closer. I didn't eat lunch, didn't stop for water. I forced my legs to keep moving, counting steps in sets of 10 to stay focused. The wind picked up in the afternoon, gusting through the trees hard enough to bend trunks. A storm was coming back in. Fine by me. Hard rain would mask my scent, my footprints, make it harder for him, if he was even human. I know how crazy that sounds. I'm a logical guy, grounded. But at some point when you're deep in the woods and something unnatural is happening, it doesn't matter if it sounds crazy. It feels real. And that's enough. When I reached the trailhead around 4 p.m., my truck was still there. Thank God. No damage. No other vehicles parked nearby. I didn't waste time. Tossed my gear in the bed, slammed the door, started the engine. I pulled out fast, tires crunching gravel, and didn't look back. It wasn't until the next day, back at home, when I decided to go over my gear, repack it, dry out my tent. Standard post-trip stuff. That's when I noticed it. Mud on my sleeping bag. On the inside. Small streaks like someone had touched it with dirty fingers. As if someone had stood outside my tent, right where my head would have been. Just standing, watching. I didn't tell anyone right away. Who would believe it? Even my wife would just say I was overtired, reading too much into nothing. Maybe she'd be right. But even now, months later, when the storms roll in and the house goes dark, I sometimes catch myself looking out the window at the tree line, expecting to see that figure standing there, waiting, watching. I don't know when he stopped following me, but some nights, I'm not sure he ever did. If these stories made you rethink isolation, you're not alone. Trust your instincts, especially when there's no one around to hear you scream. Because the scariest places aren't always haunted. Some are just too far from help. Click now to watch 4 disturbing trucker horror stories. It only gets darker from here. Stay sharp, stay safe. And remember, some people wait until you're alone. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.